Morning.
Good morning, everybody. I am delighted to welcome you to the Mayor Council Breakfast. I think the last time we had, well, not breakfast, but let's call it coffee or tea. I think we were here the last time we all met together. I want to wish a good morning to the members of the council who are present, as well as members of my cabinet and the council staff. If I could, Mr. Chairman, I just want to give a quick reminder of some of the challenges ahead of us and what the city has been through together these last couple of years. The City Administrator Donahue and Budget Director Reed will then, after your remarks, Mr. Chairman, go through some details of the budget before you. I also want to acknowledge the presence of the CFO, Fitzroy Lee, who, of course, has a role to play in our budget submission and will have a role to play in your deliberations as well. Last week, we marked together 2 years since we declared a public health emergency in the district, and we have been through a lot since then, an incredible amount of loss and challenge. And we all look forward to working together on the comeback that accelerates the work we were doing before COVID to build a fairer, more equitable, and more affordable DC. I want to thank my agency leads and our budget team for their work on this budget. I'm incredibly proud of the budget that we are submitting, and I believe that when our residents have the opportunity to learn about these investments, they will be proud too. One thing that is clear and has become even clearer since last year is that the impacts of the pandemic are far-reaching and complex. We have seen our public safety ecosystem, as one example, turned upside down. We are experiencing new challenges around housing and homelessness. We have experienced a rise in reckless driving, and we know that our students have suffered greatly. We also know that we may never fully understand the ways the pandemic has changed our lives, but the work to get people connected to opportunity, to make neighborhoods safer, and to help people regain a sense of community that we lost during the pandemic is the urgent work ahead. You will see this urgency reflected in the investments made in my fiscal 23 budget submission to the council. This budget builds on our recovery budget that we sent last year. This budget acknowledges the very real anxieties that DC residents feel when they're concerned about the affordability of the city and how long they will be able to afford to live here. It also will make big investments in public safety, in both our immediate needs at MPD and in long-term needs of our residents and communities. A year ago, we launched our comprehensive whole-of-government approach to reducing gun violence, and you will see in this budget how we are building on those investments. 2 years ago, I told DC that we're in this together, and I think that our businesses, our residents, lawmakers, policymakers, budget makers, we have proven that to be true. So today, I'm proud to deliver a budget that meets this unique moment and that will help more Washingtonians build a future in a safer, stronger, and healthier DC. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to turn it over to you for your remarks, and then we can jump right into the presentation with the City Administrator and Budget Director.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I did not come with remarks because this is your presentation and council members want to hear what you have to present. I do want to note that we have a briefing scheduled this Friday, March 18th, where you will present formally the budget to the council. And I do want to just, I guess, get assurance that we will have the budget fully from the executive on Friday.
Yes, and so let me certainly the CFO has confirmed to me that will happen, and it will happen, I think, some delivered today.
Right.
And somebody just turn to the CFO for that confirmation.
Yes, we will have by noon today, we will have volumes 1 and 5. That's the local budget and the capital budget. And then 2, 3, and 4 by Friday.
By Friday, okay.
Yes.
And I don't mean to be making a big deal of this, but it's important to us, to our count. We have under the Home Rule Act so many days in which to consider, and we have to act. And so our count will start when we get all of the books, which I recognize initially will be online, and the legislation filed as well. So that'll be Friday. Friday at noon, I believe, is the time of the hearing when you will present, and I appreciate that you will do that again this year. I think that's important when the executive presents to the council the proposed budget for the fiscal year. March 21st, April 7th, the committees will be having their hearings on the different the proposed agency budgets. April 8th, the Committee of the Whole will have a hearing on all of the budget legislation. I'm saying this more for the public's benefit, because this is an opportunity where any issue a member of the public can testify at the Committee of the Whole. That's April 8th. The folks, of course, do have to register to testify. April 20th and 21st, the committees are scheduled to have their markups that week. May 10th, the council will have its first vote on the Budget Support Act and the Local Budget Act. On May 24th, we will have the second vote on the Local Budget Act, and I believe that's also when we will be voting on the supplemental budgets and the Federal Request Act. So those are the dates that we have in our schedule. My recollection from looking at the most recent revenue estimates is that the revenue growth, both for the current fiscal year as well as in the financial plan, is over $1 billion that the mayors had to work with for formulating the FY23 budget. It really is quite a different from a couple of years ago, which was not a happy time and was very much a challenge. It was not a happy time for many reasons, probably first and foremost because we didn't know what the health toll would be with the pandemic, and then we were seeing the consequences of the shutdown. So it's very different today. Looking forward to hearing your presentation, Madam Mayor, today, and then, of course, the hearing on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin?
Thank you. First of all, it's good to see everyone in person. I get a chance to see you, have had a chance to see you virtually for each week for the past year or two. So the first slide that I'm going to talk about, and Director Reed and I are going to split the presentation in walking through some of the details. It has been 2 years almost to the day when as a country we had to shut down, as a city we had to shut down and go virtual for many activities. And this is just some data that tell a bit of the story, also data that plays a pretty fundamental role in the economic life of our city and in our revenue levels that are contained within this budget. So you do see revenue levels going down early in the pandemic and coming back up. Unemployment rates, we're not at where we were pre-pandemic, but we are approaching that point. Residential vacancies for multi-unit buildings, vacancy rates went up and have started to come down, but are not at the level we were pre-pandemic. Commercial vacancy rates have crept up. It's a lagging indicator. Very importantly, we did not have a vaccine when it first started 2 years ago. 72% of our residents are now vaccinated. Consumer spending, which you see the profound drop in consumer spending generally in our restaurants early in the pandemic, causing significant waves of unemployment, has begun to creep back up. And we also had 2 years with many fluctuating restrictions based on health guidance. And now we have fewer of them. On the next slide, you also see what helped us along in that route, which is the federal funds that we were able to receive. This just contains the federal funds that came directly into D.C. government. What went to D.C. residents goes beyond this. There is $2.2 billion in our budget between 21 and FY24. In the FY23 budget, as you see at the bottom of that slide, we have $648 million in federal aid. Now, if you look at the different ways that we spent it, now this does not include the FEMA reimbursements, which are over $300 million for very much more traditional COVID response. You see that the way that the federal government structured the relief allowed us to be able to recover and grow back and transform parts of our city. It funded significant investments in economic recovery, including the bridge program and the Housing Production Trust Fund, if you look at the second row. It allowed for us to hire tutors and social and emotional learning supports for learning acceleration. It also allowed for us to make a historic investment that we continue throughout the financial plan in gun violence prevention. So those are some of the a bit of both the economic story over the past 2 years. Director Reed is going to give a high level of the budget, then we'll jump into what you're waiting for, which is some of the details and highlights of what's contained within it. So why don't we go to the next slide and Director Reed jump into the budget overview.
Thank you, City Administrator, and good morning, council members and everyone. Just a quick overview on the fiscal year 23 budget. So our operating budget is $12 billion in general fund revenue. That includes our local funds, our dedicated taxes, as well as our special purpose revenue funds, which come from fees and fines. The local funds component of that budget itself is $10.7 billion. The local fund budget is an increase of $1.3 billion, driven largely by the revenue increases that the chairman mentioned earlier, which is a 14% increase over the 22 approved budget. That number, though, is a little bit artificially high because this does include some really significant one-time investments that we're making in this budget that we don't expect to see necessarily at the same level on a recurring basis. You're going to hear a little bit more about it in future slides, but we are making the Mayor Bowser is making another historic investment in the Housing Production Trust Fund. We're making significant investments in our human services programs as we continue to make sure that we are keeping up with the needs, big increases in our facility maintenance and in our debt service, as you'll hear about lots of new projects that are coming across all 8 wards. If you look at the chart on the right, this just shows you how that operating spending breaks down. Of course, we spend the largest share of our budget on health and human services. This does include funding for our Medicaid programs that provides our health care coverage to all DC residents who need it. The second largest share of our spending is on our public education system, and then you can see as we go down the chart how the rest of the funds are allocated. If we jump to the next slide, just a quick overview on the capital budget. So the capital improvement plan across the 6 years is $10.8 billion. This is a $1.8 billion or 20% increase over the FY 22 through 27 approved CIP. The most significant investments when you compare the prior CIP to the current CIP are in our DC public schools. We are modernizing or renovating 44 different schools in this upcoming CIP, including new schools from our PACE list, some exciting new programming around the city, and of course, continued investments in our small cap improvements. We have $465 million increase in the District Department of Transportation. We will talk more about those investments, but we are making big strides in trying to make sure that our high crash corridors and intersections are safer, that we have safer routes to schools for children, and that we are making sure to have increased mobility options across the city for bicycles, pedestrians, buses. The Department of Corrections, we'll talk about in just a minute, a big investment in that area. And then for Deputy Mayor for Planning on Economic Development, significant increases in our new communities funding, developments of our Hill East, Poplar Point, beginning work at our Fletcher Johnson site, as well as some other significant investments in our St. Elizabeth's campus. You can see from the chart on the left how our funding breaks down. Of course, the biggest share of our funding is in our operations and infrastructure, and mainly DDOT. The next largest share is in our public education system. And with that, I will turn it back over to the City Administrator to start talking through specific investments within these funding buckets.
Thank you, Director. So in the first, these slides will just highlight some highlights from the budget. There's $30 million for hiring, recruitment, and retention incentives for MPD so they can grow back to a sworn officer strength of 4,000. We have funding for 23 additional personnel to do high-quality care coordination, including life coaches with the ONES office. $1.1 million for a pilot program for long-term housing and rental assistance for our also individuals going through the ONES office, as well as increasing violence prevention support for our at-risk youth, including money for a bilingual credible messengers and $3.9 million to expand out-of-time programming. We have increases of $7.3 million for victims of sexual assault and other victim services and funding to replace our aging FEMS fleet. There's also funding for a new treatment and rehabilitation facility or a new DC jail. The funding is multi-part. The biggest part of it is to be able to build an annex to the CTF that will allow for us to effectively close the CDF, or the Central Detention Facility. The funding also includes renovations that we'll have to make to the CTF, both for its long-term care, but also retrofit some of its wings to allow for all different population types to be housed at the CTF. The annex will also allow us to be able to bring some of our residents that are the federal BOP home early to be able to be in DC before the release from incarceration. If you go to the next slide, we talk highlights of Health and Human Services, which include funding $11 million to increase wages for direct support professionals, those who care for our most vulnerable residents, expanding school nursing services and additional health services, and funding to extend the Alliance enrollment to 12 months and end the required in-person 6 months recertification. There's also funding of more than $100 million over 2 years for the modernization and renovations at permanent and temporary supportive housing facilities, as well as funding for more services at 801 East Shelter, the DC Animal Shelter, including funding to both continue operations but also build a new DC Animal Shelter, and funding to enforce flavored tobacco sales, and expanding eligibility for those with developmental disabilities to be able to access our services. On the right, you see programs for seniors as well as ending chronic homelessness. For seniors, you see funding for free dental care, the distribution of tablets in communities, expanding our Connector Card program, and a program to end senior hunger by providing grocery card distribution to seniors. And then a significant investment of $31 million in Homeward DC that would add permanent supportive vouchers, 500 for individuals, 260 for families, and 10 for youth. I'll highlight now just a few of the education investments. You know about the increase we had in the universal per student formula funding. We also provide historic investment in replacing our HVAC system, which is both a capital investment of HVACs at schools and money for preventive maintenance of those HVAC systems, as well as increases in mental health supports for students and a $35 million investment to stand up a community-based program at the Winston Educational Campus to make it a magnet lab for STEM work for kids throughout the city. In addition to youth recreation opportunities, extending the out-of-school time enhancement and additional programming at DPR, and continuing our expansion of the SYP program of 4,200 additional slots. More for education now on recreation. The different number of investments we've made to expand access opportunities is really highlighted on your left. 10,000 slots for camp slots, 1,400 more learn to swim slots, Tiny Tots gymnastics programs, 1,200 opportunities for girls in new volleyball, softball, and soccer teams. And so it just gives you a snapshot, this is as much more of the different investments we've made to give kids an opportunity for more recreation. Then on the capital budget, you see a picture of RFK Stadium. That's because on the RFK campus, the mayor's included in her budget a $60 million investment for a significant citywide indoor sports facility that will include an indoor track, gymnastic training, climbing walls, boxing. That will be a large citywide attraction across the city for indoor recreation. And then my final education slide, because there were too much to include in merely one slide, is some of the asset preservation you see in our capital budget. So it includes $294 million over 6 years for our parks, fields, technology support, including funding for smart boards and our continued compliance with ADA renovations. $45 million for a new high school on MacArthur Boulevard. That will be both a neighborhood feeder school and have dedicated citywide seats. $71 million to add 4 new schools to the PACE list for full modernizations, those schools being Simon, Henley, Bunker Hill, and Langley Elementary Schools, and $434 million over 6 years to modernize and construct parks, recreational centers, and libraries, including full funding for all remaining library renovations and new funding to modernize the Rita Bright Rec Center a dog park at Oxen Run, a new rec center for the River Terrace community, a new indoor pool at the Hillcrest Recreation Center, and as I mentioned, a brand new indoor sports complex at RFK Stadium. Director Reed will now walk us through the next set of clusters.
Great. Thank you, City Administrator. So as I mentioned previously when I talked about the capital investments plan, Mayor Bowser has made it a priority to make sure that we are making investments in this budget to address our high crash corridors and intersections. There's a new $10 million recurring investment that will allow us to build quick build traffic calming measures. So this will allow us to respond more quickly when we see incidents and install both quick build, medium build, and then set us up for the long-term improvements that need to be made to address those corridors. That gets into the second item, which is $200 million over 6 years for those longer-term streetscape projects that both help beautify our city, but also help really address the issues with the design of the roadway that make them more dangerous. There's also significant investments to make travel around the city safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. So we'll continue our investment of adding 10 more miles of protected bike lanes every year. There's $9.4 million to support 100 new full-time school crossing guard and traffic control officer positions, so that every school that has requested a crossing guard will have one, and then we have space for more. A lot of these new positions are actually converting our part-time school crossing guards to full-time opportunities. We'll also add $9.4 million to add more ATE cameras, 170 new speed cameras specifically across the city to help enforce speed limits. There's also new cameras for bus lane enforcement and red light and stop sign cameras. We will triple DPW's booting and capacity and towing capacity in order to enforce those vehicles that are driving dangerously and not paying their tickets. And then we'll also make it easier to move around, not in a car. So $57 million to complete the K Street Transit Way, $102 million to continue the work started by Mayor Bowser last year to make bus priority efficiency lanes and improvements to make bus travel faster. $15 million over 6 years so that every resident has a capital bike share station within a quarter mile of their home, and $125 million for new or rehabilitated trails. There's also, as was mentioned earlier, $18.5 million for new pedestrian and bicycle bridges to connect Kingman Island to the RFK campus. If we jump to the next slide, a key focus of Mayor Bowser's investments during her tenure has been housing affordability. And as Mayor Bowser mentioned in her opening remarks, a lot of residents are nervous and they're anxious about how long they can continue to stay. So we have a new set of investments this year that are really focusing on making sure that longtime residents can stay in the district. This starts with a new $1 million fund that's called Heirs Property Legal Services. We want to make sure that multi-generation households can pass on those households to their children, to their grandchildren when they pass away, and keep those assets in the family. This will provide grants to legal service providers to provide the necessary support so that they can keep that home in their family. The next is a $10 million investment in a new Black homeownership fund and strike force. This strike force will be set up this summer and begin the work to understand how can we make sure to increase homeownership amongst Black residents in the district. We will continue our investments to make sure that seniors can continue to stay in their homes, and part of that is by limiting their property tax increases. So we will be reducing the senior property tax cap growth from 5% to 2%. We'll add more funds to our single-family rehab program. We will add a new set of funds to help residents make their homes more resilient to floods, and then continue investments in home weatherization, lead remediation, and mold removal. Of course, it goes without saying that Mayor Bowser's made the Housing Production Trust Fund a key focus of her administration and building and preserving more housing. We will make a $500 million investment in the Housing Production Trust Fund in FY23, and also include $41 million of project and sponsor-based vouchers so that we can make sure to meet the affordability targets for very low-income residents as part of the Housing Production Trust Fund. We'll add $110 million over 3 years to rehabilitate 1,500 units of public housing, as well as $219 million to bring back public housing units to the Berry Farm, Park Morton, Bruce Monroe, and Northwest One communities. There's $120 million in rent and utility assistance over 2 fiscal years to make sure that we can help residents avoid eviction, and $12 million for a housing provider fund in this fiscal year to help landlords whose tenants are behind on their rent. And lastly, we continue our investments in our home purchase assistance program and employee assistance program with $26 million. If we jump to the next slide, we all know that economic recovery, and particularly equitable economic recovery, has been a focus of the last several years. There's significant investments maintained and expanded in this budget to support small and local businesses. $22 million new investment to add more fresh food access to east of the river. $6 million to help equity impact enterprises buy their commercial property, as well as provide more flexible financing options to grow their business. Continued investments in small and medium business growth, piloting activations in vacant commercial spaces, and $500,000 to increase employer spend with minority-led firms. We will add $8 million to continue our investment in our arts and entertainment industries as they continue to recover from the pandemic, and $1.5 million to continue to waive the public space fees for our neighborhood festivals and community-driven events. We will invest $21 million to raise the wages for all participants in DOES training programs. This will bring the job training wage for adults to the minimum wage of $16.10 an hour starting July 1st this year. We will also raise the wage for the Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program participants from $9 an hour to $13 an hour starting this year, and the wages for 12 to 14-year-olds from $6.25 an hour to $8 an hour this year. We have, of course, a focus on making sure we can reimagine tourism and bring back more tourists to the district. So there's $5 million in new competitive grants to create new family attractions to bring folks downtown. $5 million to continue our marketing efforts, including trying to lure some new residents who want to telework and take advantage of the great amenities here in the district. And $750,000 to pay DC musicians to play music at key destinations to activate and enliven public spaces. We continue our $7.5 million in our Vitality Fund to attract and transform businesses in the downtown. We start off with a $233,000 investment that grows to $2.5 million a year for a tax abatement to convert commercial office space into residential office space in the downtown. And then $5 million to help businesses convert their office space to bring their workers back into the city. I'm now going to turn it back to the city administrator to talk about some of our core service and customer experience investments.
Thank you, Director. Now, as you each go and have your oversight hearings with agencies, what we try to do in this budget is to recognize that during the pandemic, many agencies have seen a real increase in demand for services. That includes everything from DPW and DMV to the unemployment insurance program at DOES. So we made efforts to try to increase staffing levels for core services and also try to rethink how we engage with our customers. So a few of them are listed here, and I won't go through each one here, but it represents a philosophy we have of trying to make sure the customer experience lives up to what people expect of us. You'll see expansions and enhancements of staffing for core services at OUC, at Fire EMS, for our leaf collection program, significant increase for individuals at DHS that are handling applications for public benefits, increases for unemployment call center, and DMV staffing, as well as the different staffs that review public space inspections. So those aren't new programs. Those are us plussing up agencies to be able to address the increase in need they have and pay attention to quality. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll also see, and you'll see, I think, in each one of your agency oversight hearings, different investments, but also different changes in management practice that may not reflect entirely in the budget of how we engage with our customers, including a redesign of DC.gov, the creation of rapid response teams to address facility issues and repairs at DPR facilities, increasing live agents for licensing and permitting staff, bike lane cleaning teams, as well as self-service, expansion of the self-service kiosk at DMV. So Those are just a flavor of some things that will improve the customer experience while adding to what the agencies have on hand to address demand. So the very final closing of this presentation is my way of saying, but that's not all, because we also have an infrastructure bill that the federal government passed, some of which is formula-based, some of which is competitive. That will provide opportunities for us to really go beyond even what we walk through here in terms of stabilizing and creating a long-term legacy around our capital. And Director Reed will walk through a bit about what to expect from the infrastructure law that we're working through.
Thank you, City Administrator. And so as you all can see on the slide, the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to bring a significant amount of investment into the district to improve infrastructure across the board. What you see here are the formula funding grants that we expect to receive over the next 4 years. It totals about $3 billion in new funding that will be split across roads, highways, and bridges, transit, electric vehicles, improvements to energy and the environment, water, and then broadband and cyber. And if you flip to the next page, while we are still learning a lot about the programs and the funding and the specific requirements, we do know that there are a lot of things that we can start to do right now based on the guidance we're receiving from the federal government and the money starting to come in. And I'll highlight just a few of these. So critically important, there's $225 million to bring the district's structurally deficient bridges into a state of good repair. This will help us accelerate bridges across the district and allow them to bring into a state of good repair much faster than otherwise. We'll have $85 million to improve traffic safety and driver behavior in support of Vision Zero. $17 million to build out a network of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, funding to accelerate the electrification of our school buses and our circulator fleet, $100 million for ubiquitous connectivity across the district, $143 million to DC Water and DOEE to accelerate the removal of lead pipes from the district, $62 million to DOEE in order to continue and fast-track efforts to clean up DC bodies of water, and then additional funds to augment our weatherization assistance, our energy resilience, and our cybersecurity risk mitigation. As we go through the budget process over the next year, we'll continue to be updating you all on the infrastructure investment. It's quite a lot, and we're still learning. This also, I should note, doesn't include the $1.4 billion of competitive grants that are out there that we are beginning to assess and look at how to apply for some really critical improvements in the district. And with that, City Administrator, I will turn it to you and the Mayor for closing remarks.
It's a balanced $19.5 billion budget that will bring us back. Excuse me. I know, I am choked up. I've been saying the last couple of days, I love spring, it just doesn't love me. And peak bloom is in 4 days, and my allergies are letting me know.
So let me turn to colleagues, see if colleagues have questions. Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and team, for your presentation. I want to thank you in particular for investing in the Alliance benefit for our immigrant residents and for updating that program to better serve those who use it, for your investments in the Human Services Cluster, and for funding the program that expands assistance to those with developmental disabilities. So thank you for that. I had two questions. One, is the $120 million in rental assistance going to be part of ERAP, or would we be standing STAY-DC up again, or something else?
We expect that it'll be part of ERAP, or the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, but we do recognize that the platform we use for STAY-DC worked, and we are investigating how we can migrate that application process to a STAY-DC-like process.
Great.
Difference being that STAY-DC was tied to the federal requirements of a specific pandemic impact.
Very good. And that's over 2 years, the $120 million.
Correct.
Great. The other thing that I noted quickly was that It appears that the ombudsperson for children and all the FTEs associated that we had put in the budget at $935,000 recurring was cut entirely. Am I seeing that correctly?
I believe you are.
Okay.
As you know, we just don't think that's the best way to serve children. We recognize it's a priority for the council, and I do hope we can continue to work on how we can best serve children.
Mm-hmm. Given that we are in the process of hiring that ombudsperson, obviously we'll be working to restore those funds. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Mayor Bowser, and your team for this presentation today. I look forward to digging a little deeper during a hearing. But I see here you on a slide, I think it's page 3, about violence prevention at 2021 at $41.8 million, and then at 2022, yeah, 41.8. And I do remember in the last presentation we had here, it was at, I believe, about $53 million for violence intervention. And I can't seem to find where that money was in the budget last year. I saw that approximately $33.4 million went to the one's office, but I'm not sure how that's broken up and where is, and how the money is, where's it going for violence prevention?
Jenny.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So the funding for the continued investments in gun violence prevention, this continues the investments we made in FY22 in the budget you saw last year. So the expansion of violence interrupters at ones, the expanded pathways program, the enhanced behavioral health supports. The difference from the number you see here from the number last year is that we also included some funding on the federal funds for DDOT work in the neighborhoods. That funding was changed by the council to go in the CIP, so you all still funded the same programs, but you put them in the CIP instead of on the ARPA, and that's the difference from last year to this year. But we did not change any of the underlying investments in any of the core operating programs.
So I do remember money going to DPW for violence prevention work. I'm not sure about DDOT. And we get a lot of pushback from DPW workers about becoming permanent. Is there a plan to use that violence prevention money to be every year to be permanent, because we can hire them for a year or two, but then they right back in a worse position they was before they got their families on track, new housing situations and all and that?
Yes. The budget for DPW will add positions to their seasonal program, as well as adding full-time positions that will allow for DPW to be able to hire back the individuals that many of them had come year after year. So that money will be in the budget.
And how do you differentiate the $15 million in the category for youth safety? What agency is that money under? And how does it get out to the community?
So a big element of the safety work was our increase in the Safe Passage program, and in making sure that we could have more adults on the street to help make sure that kids could go back and forth to school safely. There was also a new enhancement last year for our DC Connect program that would help provide transportation options to students in safe passage areas in Ward 7 and 8.
So I followed that work very closely. I was a part of the conversations before it came to be. And I'm noticing that the proposed, I guess, salaries for the workers was one thing, but now they're significantly lower. And even the providers haven't beefed up their staff to cover the areas that was proposed in the grant process. And so just want to follow that closely to make sure we're doing just that. And, of course, you know, Mr. Donahue, that we talked about those workers being inside the school instead of just standing outside watching people walk, because you're just a glorified crossing guard with no relationships and no real intervention. Can you speak to that?
Well, first, I think we share the same goals, and we'll be happy to work with you over the next couple of months of the oversight process. The goal is to, and we are expanding the school-based violence intervention program, but certainly you and I have spoken, the goal of some of the individuals who are hired for Safe Passage have a lot of talent and ability to really have positive connections with kids that we want to be able to expand on and make the most of. So I'm happy to work with you over the course of the next couple of months.
And speaking of crossing guards, I'm sure you know a lot of them develop relationships with children and families. They're consistent adults, and they're making a community safer, both in terms of some of the more gun violent and violent issues that we see, but also in terms of traffic safety. We are pleased to increase the number of crossing guards that we have, and also add hours to our crossing guards. So instead of working 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, they will work 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening.
Thank you. If I can continue, Chairman. You also said you were going to put $30 million to recruit for 4,000 new officers. I want to know, is any of that money going to be going inside the schools? There has been some conversation in the last 3 years about putting aside. I know Anacostia has one, but never really maximized its potential. I believe 3 students actually went into the cadet program. So that we're trying to see if you're going to go to other schools, you want to expand it to make sure we got D.C. residents becoming police officers in the district.
Yeah, the cadet program, when you see when we get into the oversight process and you see where the growth is coming from, cadets take 2 years to be able to turn into officers. So you'll see the increases that we all made about a year ago in expanding the cadet program will start to become officers next year, the year after. And the chief knows, he's sitting right back there, that we will expand the cadet program to match what he sees as demand in high schools to be able to enter it. So that is a big part of the recruitment vision for the chief.
So are you going to be expanding to other schools?
Right now, we're not expanding to other schools. We will see more cadets coming into the police force based on the expansion that happened last year. If the chief believes that we can absorb more cadets into the program, that's something that we have to come back to.
And Councilmember, generally speaking, this commitment to the cadet program and also the chief's 30 by 30 pledge, the pledge to have our force be a force of 30% female officers by 2030, reflects how we want to grow our force. We need the police that we need, and we want to emphasize hiring DC residents and women.
And lastly, Chairman, I did know we were in conversation about building 2 grocery stores in Ward 8, and somehow one of the grocery stores did not come to fruition at the MLK Gateway. I'm trying to figure out, are we going to put money in the budget to make that happen? Because somehow it's just disappeared and just never happened. And I was never notified, and the community was never notified. A&Cs wasn't notified that was not going to happen.
Well, we have enjoyed some success bringing grocery to Ward 8 and to Ward 7, and we're not done. We want to appreciate the investment that was made last year. I think $59 million
Across 2 fiscal years.
Across 2 fiscal years in food access. And this year we're proposing another chunk of dollars that will allow us to bring food sellers, that includes groceries and restaurants, towards 7 and 8.
I think I'm asking specifically about the MLK Gateway, because general dollars we have specifically, because it was supposed to be in a proposal for MLK Gateway, and it never happened.
Okay, Councilmember, I'll have to follow up with you specifically about that project.
All right.
But those funds can be used in areas that lack food access.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Mayor. Spring loves me as much as you. So first off, congrats to you and your team for putting a big budget together. And I know we don't have all the budget books yet, so certainly we'll dig in with more detail and work with your team. So we're kind of reacting to a couple of the elements of the presentation. A couple of things I felt like I really wanted to note. I think including the funding for the new DC jail, a new facility, is an incredibly significant event. And I definitely want the public to understand that as well.
Thank you.
It really creates, I think, an opportunity. It's not just 4 walls of a building. It's really an opportunity for us to really create that transformational investment that we need in our criminal justice system. It's not just the physical space, which we all know is unacceptable as it is, but it really provides an opportunity for that type of investment in a rehabilitation-focused criminal justice system that makes our city safer and addresses the ongoing liability that exists every day that the current facility exists. So I think that, let's be honest, when you're facing a capital budget decision, there's a lot of things that schools and parks and rec centers that certainly people would love to see. Making the commitment of a capital investment in this facility is significant, and I think is really going to be great for our city. I look forward to working with you and your team on the details of it, but it needs to be noted.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Councilmember.
Obviously, as we go through the budget with the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, I look forward to working with you on more details around your proposed investments with MPD, with our violence prevention efforts, with our victim services, the way in which we're going to fully fund our entire public safety response. So I know we don't have all the details here, but look forward to working with your team on and the questions around that. A couple other quick issues I just wanted to highlight. I really want to commend you for the investment in on the RFK campus of that new facility. I know that several years ago when we went through the Events DC planning process and visioning process of thinking through this, which resulted in the Fields, which is a phenomenal addition to our city that serves certainly Ward 7 and Ward 6, right there on the border there, but really our entire city. I think creating this type of space is going to be just a wonderful investment for our families in DC, and so I'm looking forward to working with you on that, but it's a really big deal. I also am glad to see the investments in transportation. I think that as we've seen the increasing fatalities on our roads, unfortunately, I think some of the ways you've laid out some of these funds, the quick build, moving some of the temporary steps we've taken to make them permanent, the safe travel investments, the crossing guards, all will make a difference. And so I'm looking forward to digging into those, really seeing how you want to plan, what those look like, getting the feedback. But I think those can be really significant investments in our transportation system and public safety overall.
Thank you.
So as we get more details, I look forward to digging in with more
Absolutely.
questions. But I just wanted to note these quick responses to the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And Councilmember, as you know, we've approached federal land similarly in making investments, local investments on federal property. RFK has been through a pretty significant public outreach process. So we have a sense of all of the local amenities that we need at RFK. And this is us putting down our down payment. We still need the Congress to deliver because we still will need to extend our lease in order that we make these investments. So we think that this new facility that has been Director Anderson has been talking about this facility for a long time, right, Keith? And because we lack it.
Yep.
All right? We don't have, our kids are leaving DC public schools to go to Maryland to do indoor track right now. Our kids are leaving the city to do gymnastics. So we really do need this facility. We want to put our marker down at RFK. And we want the federal government to deliver so that we can take care of it. Right now, this federal asset has a decaying stadium, and it's really a shame. And so we're going to start that investment. Another thing that is included in that, to start that investment, also envisioned in the RFK visioning process that Events DC conducted, was connection to Kingman Island. And those bridges, both bike and pedestrian, are included here.
Absolutely. And it's a great thing. Glad to see it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mayor Bowser, and to your team. I would echo what Councilmember Allen mentioned about the investment around the new jail. Obviously, you know, we've been there. We've put a lot of money in terms of Band-Aids around maintenance, and it's now time for a facility that I think meets our goals on that front. I also want to highlight these investments in recreation and out-of-school time, which are huge. You know, the additional camp spots, like the text messages have already started of parents who are wishing that it was this year because they're nervous about
this year.
Councilmember, we will be, not the full complement that you saw there, but we are going to be adding
and we're making news.
$3.4 million to expand some of those offerings this summer.
Okay.
So get ready.
Okay. Well, hopefully the website works and doesn't crash this time. So anyway, I think this is great in terms of the out-of-school time and the investment in young people. But as I'm flipping through this, we're adding a lot of new FTEs. How are y'all planning to hire all of these wonderful individuals? Because execution is everything, especially even, from the 911 to the caseworkers on benefits side. I think DCHR is doing a hiring fair today and tomorrow, but this, rough counting, we're talking hundreds of new FTEs here. So what's the plan?
Do you know the total number of new FTEs?
Sure. So, Councilmember, I think there's a couple things that we're doing around adding new FTEs. So we are, of course, recruiting as much as possible. So you talked about the hiring fairs that we're having right now. And someone will remind me of where people can go online.
DCHR.gov.
In order to find out more information about where you can join those hiring fairs. We have a lot of exciting opportunities for people who are interested in joining the district government. We are also really focused right now on having internal conversations on how can we do better recruitment and retention for our district government employees. So in fact, the mayor had a cabinet meeting just yesterday where this was a topic of discussion, and directors are really starting to think creatively about how we can bring in more talent.
Okay. Well, on that, can I?
Yeah.
We're bringing in more talent. Will they have the same public leave benefits that we are offering on the private sector? One of the things I think all the members of the council introduced legislation to have DC government workers have the same amount of paid family leave that we're offering on the private sector, and I didn't see that mentioned, but it could be in the details. I'm just curious whether or not we'll see that expansion when we get the full documents.
That expansion is not in here, council members. So I think one thing that we want to make sure that we do is have a good understanding of the impacts of the paid family leave program on district government. It is very, very important. When you have more people on leave, you have staffing challenges as well. So we got to make sure that we are implementing this program in the best way possible. And so it's something that we're looking at right now about how the private sector paid family leave program is managed and run for some lessons learned. So we can think about that as part of our recruitment and retention packages in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Pinto?
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations, Mayor Bowser and your entire team for this really exciting day and a lot of wonderful investments as we seek to address the immediate needs of our residents and businesses, and also our medium and longer term strategy to keep the success of our city running. I'm particularly enthusiastic to see investments in here around recovery and conversions of office spaces to residential units, public safety investments in violence interruption and our Metropolitan Police Department, as well as the new jail facility, which will be really transformational. Thrilled to see the announcement of a new Center City Middle School. As you know, we just had the hearing last week and heard continued robust enthusiasm from so many families, and that's really going to make a huge difference to the Cardozo feeder pattern. Happy to see the 1.5, oh, thank you. Happy to see the $1.5 million investment for activation of vacant spaces, which is really important, as well as investments in Hardy and Francis Field renovations. I do want to ask about the permanent supportive housing vouchers and supporting our neighbors experiencing homelessness. I'm happy to see additional investments in these vouchers, but curious what the plan is to mobilize these vouchers expeditiously, and if there are any particular funding sources for new FTEs or new programs or new supports for the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services to ensure that these vouchers get to where they need to go as fast as possible.
Thank you for that question. So the Department of Human Services and DC Housing Authority have been working very, very hard to connect as many people as quickly as possible. We do know, though, that there are some steps along the way that we can make improvements in to speed that up. So one of the things that we've been working on with the Housing Authority is redefining some of their regulations about how you determine eligibility so that we can speed up that process. There can be more self-attestation of certain requirements rather than having to go around and get lots of your documentation. That process was used with the emergency housing vouchers that came from the federal government, and we saw that it did make improvements. And so we are, the Housing Authority is working on those regulations to make that true for all of our vouchers across the system. The second thing is there's also an investment of $2 million for expanded outreach in that $31 million bucket so that we can make sure that we are connecting with residents wherever they are, letting them know about the opportunities for housing and making sure that they're connected. And then there are also additional staff to go along with the vouchers so that we make sure we have the proper case managers, but also the people needed just to get the folks in housing.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Do you have anything to add to that? Or that was, okay. Well, this is more a note to my colleagues then, unless there's something in the details that we'll look through a little bit later, but still hoping that we can have additional focus on a Ward 2 senior center and additional funding for our excluded workers. But thank you very much.
Additional funding for who?
For our excluded workers.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Silverman.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Madam Mayor.
Good morning.
Good to see you. Is it afternoon? Oh, it's afternoon. Thanks, Councilmember Che, for correcting me. Always appreciate that. So, Madam Mayor, there's a lot of good stuff in here, and it actually echoes, oh, thank you, directional mics. It echoes a lot of the things that were in the council resolution, I see, that we had priorities for the, we passed a resolution on FY22 supplemental priorities. ERAP, violence prevention, the HVAC repairs stood out to me. I did want to pursue a few things, though. So specifically on public safety, I mean, as we all know, polling shows, constituent emails show, just the general conversation in the city is that public safety crime has risen to be the #1 issue for our residents. The summer's coming. I think historically we see there's a spike during the summer. So I wanted to understand what's in the supplemental that we're going to do now to address especially violent crime and carjackings that are in the public conversation and actually have harmed our residents. And then I guess here's the question I think would be, we're putting violence prevention money. It's a little unclear to me what we're doing in terms of police for FY23. I see there's a path to 4,000, but I'm a little unclear what that means in terms of the fiscal year 23 budget. Like, are we doing something, let me put it in a simple way. Are we doing just more of the same, or are we doing something different in the 23 budget to address this issue?
We are doing different things, but to talk about this summer, to talk about tonight and tomorrow and next week, I think it's important to talk about everybody doing what they should be doing and doing it a lot more and doing it in person. We have talked about how having our whole ecosystem shut down for a period of time has impacted public safety, and it can't be denied. From kids not going to school, to supervising agencies not supervising, to courts not operating, have all had an impact on our public safety. For people not having access to their normal standard mental health services, to people not going to work. All of those things have impacted levels of crime in the city. So our focus internally, and some of it will require additional money, and we will put that additional money in it. But some of it is making sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing. We're very focused on the people of promise, as I'm sure Director Harley Harper has explained. People who have been identified as likely to commit crime because of their previous use of guns are likely to be victims of crime, and pouring as many services into those people as possible. That's a different set of people than the juveniles that we see who are committing, who have contributed a lot to our robberies and carjackings. and we will have a different set of strategies for those young people. But part of it is making sure they're held accountable before they escalate into more violence. So we funded last year a number of programs and services that are going to be helpful with both groups. You've also heard Chief Conti talk about a homicide reduction strategy that is focused on 4 PSA areas that are contributing in a oversized way to gunshots and homicides in the city. So there's quite a lot more. On this budget, Jenny will remind me exactly how many officers we're going to be able to get in each fiscal year. You've heard me say before when we were dealing with our retirement bubble that we're going to hire as many as we safely can, as long as the budget is there. As you know, we have not been able to hire for 2 years, and that is going to take us some years to dig out of, given the level of attrition that we see. So our approach to our sworn officer force is to retain as many people as possible every year and to hire as many people as possible. And that's how we'll grow to an acceptable level.
Yes. And Mayor, following up on the number of officers, the FY23 budget should allow us to hire 347 new officers. Unfortunately, we also expect to lose 311 officers through attrition, so it'll be a net increase of 36 officers. That will be the first increase, though, in a couple years after several years of decline, as the Mayor mentioned. I also wanted to follow up on your question on the supplemental.
But Jenny, before you move on, that's why some of the investments that we have in the retention area are important, because we just can't get there with a net of 30 plus every year. We need to be able to keep some of that 300, and that's why the incentives that you see included are there.
Okay.
And just on the supplemental, so as I mentioned previously, there will be $3.4 million to start accelerating that Recreation for All expansion. There's another $1 million for grants through the Department of Parks and Recreation specifically targeted to CBOs for out-of-school time programming for youth at risk. Okay. There's also $500,000 in order to activate our Camp Riverview use a little bit more, so that we can bring some of these at-risk youth out of the city and provide them some recreation and team building areas. And then the thing I do want to mention about that, just like last year, council members, we will be submitting an emergency supplemental to you all for this type of funding, as well as our rental assistance funding. There are things that we just cannot wait until June or July to get out the door.
Yeah.
So you will see that from us as well.
Okay. I do have a few more, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Let me follow up. Madam Mayor, you mentioned mental health. And I see there's $3.8 million in school-based mental health. How does that compare to what we've done in previous years? Certainly we hear from all the parents in the room about the difficulty our kids have had during COVID. Is 3.8 a big increase over, say, what we're doing this year? How does it compare?
I'll look to see what last year's number was, but it is what we need and what we can put in place. And to Councilmember Henderson's point, it is the area where we're having a lot of difficulty recruiting licensed social workers, behavioral health professionals are in very high demand and in shortage everywhere in the United States. So we think that we put in a number of folks that we can hit. But that is an area of strain for us to hire.
Okay.
And I'll just add to that, in last year's budget investment, the mayor made sure that every school had the ability to have a school-based clinician. This investment this year recognizes and builds off that some schools need more than one. Some schools have a population that they need more support. So we'll be adding 50 additional school-based behavioral support specialists. We'll be expanding our high-fidelity wraparound services to another 6 or 7 schools, which is really intense wraparound services. And then to the mayor's point, we are also investing in a workforce pipeline. So working with CBOs to partner with our local universities so that we can build that connection to get these workers in faster.
Okay, great. I've also, I think, heard about reciprocity issues around licensing, like that we might have licensing that doesn't recognize licensing in Maryland or Virginia. Like, if there was any way to address those issues with, that we work together so that we can create that pipeline a little quicker, I think that would be a great thing for the council and the mayor, the executive to work on. I know I'm hitting all the big buckets. So Housing Production Trust Fund. So this is a mammoth investment of $500 million. How much of that is from the FY21 surplus? My understanding is some of the technical delay of the budget was around the FY21, calculating the FY21
Well, it's less than we
surplus.
thought. Let's just put it that way. Jenny?
Yes. So council member, if you think about that investment, and the surplus ended up being about $184 million.
Okay.
So that would have been about $92 million. But think about when we're putting together the budget, we're looking at all available resources.
Okay.
And we're making sure that they go in the right bucket. So we made sure that $500 million got in there. That surplus helped, but we moved the pieces around to make it work.
Okay, so it's not 283.2 million anymore, it's 92 that's coming from the FY21 surplus?
The overall surplus went down.
To HBTF?
No, overall. The overall surplus went down to $184 million.
Right, and it's split between HBTF and
PAYGO,
correct? Mm-hmm. So 92 million went to HBTF?
That surplus helped us balance the budget. It did go to HBTF. It's used overall as a resource to help us balance the budget.
Okay. I'm sure the public is enamored of numbers conversation, so I'll move on.
May I just add, Council Member, you started by saying it's a mammoth investment, and that's true. And the need is also mammoth. We know very well that DC residents was struck by the comment that the thing that would cause DC residents to leave DC now, the number one issue is housing affordability. When I started doing this, it was schools. And so the need is there. We've demonstrated over the course of 7 years that we're building a system and within DC government and also outside of DC government that can support that level of funding. Deputy Mayor Falchicchio mentioned to me that the last solicitation, what was the balance on that?
So in the last solicitation, we have applications of $398 million.
So it's there, the projects are there, the people are there who can move the projects to produce those units that will get us, what do we estimate, 2,600 units?
About 2,700.
2,700 units.
So, this is where I think there's a lot of agreement between us. I think the issue is, immediate, we have to plan both for the immediate and for the future. And the trust fund is a production fund, largely.
And preservation, yeah.
And preservation, yes. But the preservation is a smaller point, a part of it. My point just being, if people are saying that, there's an immediate need to address housing. And, we want to look at all of our tools that we have in our housing toolkit to address the immediate need.
Right.
It's...
And you'll find a lot in this budget that talks about immediate needs from rental assistance for people who are still experiencing hardship from this pandemic. It's a pretty significant number, $120 million over 2 years. And you'll find repairs. The best affordable housing out there is the housing that people have, if it's safe. And so how we're investing in that for people who are in public housing is critical. Also for homeowners who have great housing, but it needs some fixing up. It needs repairs. And so the single family rehab program will allow them to do that. Capping senior property taxes keeps a little bit more money in a senior's pocket so they can make those repairs themselves. So there's a lot of ways that we're attacking immediate needs for people across the income spectrum.
I think there's a lot of agreement here and a lot of ways we can work together. I do want to, my last question, Mr. Chairman, I do want to emphasize a point that Councilmember Henderson made. I think we hear about whether you call it the Great Resignation, or we have a very volatile labor market and a very competitive labor market. And I'm hearing from government agency directors, there's a lot of competition for good people, and we want good people. And we did introduce the paid family leave bill for district government workers to help us with recruitment, because we're at a disadvantage right now in terms of competing with our private sector employers and competing with, now that the paid family leave private sector program is going to expand its benefits, as well as with the federal government, which is a major competitor for us. It is disappointing to hear that there was no expansion of our paid leave program because we can't deliver good services unless we have good people working for us. And my understanding is, from reading and from speaking to people in our government, people are looking around.
Well,
and this is a benefit that people want.
Yes, and that's obvious. That's an obvious observation, if I dare say. We know that's happening in employers across the country, governments included. And that's why we have been very focused on making sure that we treat our employees fairly and we pay them fairly and we have competitive benefits. So Director Reed has already addressed how we have to make sure we have enough teachers, firefighters, police officers. These are people that if they don't show up, somebody else has to fill their slot. And so we have to take those things into consideration, and I hope you will too. So I support your goals of making sure that we have the best pay and benefits and that we can hire good people, and hopefully they all live in D.C.
Yes.
That's what we are. That's what we're striving for. And we have included the ability. You were present, and I thank you for attending. We have been able to reach a contract agreement with 11,000 of our employees, and I think you can see that those labor leaders were very happy that we had come to fair terms with them. And we are focused on making sure that all of our collective bargaining units are at the table with Director Lindsay Maxwell and his team so that we can reach agreements with them too. I've made it very, very clear from the start of this pandemic to our comeback that we want our team with us. And we want everybody who's energetic, has great ideas, and want to work for the people of the District of Columbia to stay with us. And we're going to stay committed to that. Because of our commitment and some of the tough decisions that we made, we've had no rifts, no layoffs, and nobody has missed a paycheck over the course of 2 years. Some people worked at home even when their jobs, they couldn't do their jobs at home. So our commitment to our workers is clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Lewis-Charge.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, Madam Mayor, and to your team. I echo congratulations on the budget you all have put together here. Also, really excited to see a few things in here, recreational updates for 2 Ward 4 facilities. I want to thank you for the hiring of full-time crossing guards. I think it's a phenomenal thing. And the investments in our ERAP, permanent supportive housing, as well as raises for the summer youth employment. I do think those will go a long way. I want to ask on one note that we just touched on a little bit with Councilmember Silverman, and that's for the single family residential rehab program. As you know, we want to make sure our seniors are able to age in place. And a few of our seniors are still on the back list, the backlog list from that program, and are waiting to have the repairs on their homes. I saw on page 12 we did about $3 million there. I was wondering if we also are adding sort of any additional capacity there, because it looks like one of the issues is that we didn't have enough FTEs supporting that program to get, the construction started. So I just wanted to see, I know you and I both have a commitment to making sure our seniors can age in place, and this is one of the programs that they really like, and it helps them also. I know we have the 2% tax there,
but they need help with like getting contractors, having
Absolutely.
contractors come in. You know, that process is cumbersome for them. So what can you say to me about sort of how we're beefing up the staffing capacity and the contractor capacity there for the seniors who are already on the backlog and the seniors
Yep.
who I think are going to try to come in this year?
And I'm going to turn to John in a second, but I've been focused on this program since I've been sitting where you're sitting. It's a big issue, and I regret that we haven't made more progress, I have to tell you. And so what I've charged my team with is fixing the process. I think we have some initial work that's showing promise, but it has my 100% attention that if we don't fix it where it is, we're going to change it entirely so that we're getting those dollars at the door. But John has asked me for some time to make those process improvements, and he wants to report on them.
So the Department of Housing and Community Development has worked to streamline the process. And so what used to happen was that each homeowner would apply, they'd wait to have an evaluation of what their needs were. Then there would be a contractor or group of contractors who would come in, they would bid on the job, they would wait to hear back, then we would have to match the resident and the contractor. I'm saying this all because it sounds like a lot, because it was. So what our new approach is actually to work with Department of Housing and Community Development, Department of General Services, and our Office of Contracting and Procurement to put these repairs into bundles so that the homeowner doesn't have to navigate the selection of a contractor. That's going to allow us to actually expedite the repairs. So since 1982, when the program was put in place, we've helped about 900 homeowners. We think we can help a substantial number this fiscal year by actually doing this new process where we actually pre-select the contractors, the work that has to be done, and then just match the homeowner with that work. It takes a lot of the steps out of the process. So DHCD is going to give us some more kind of process mapping to show you how it's been made more efficient. But what we think at the end is that we'll be able to actually help more families and residents by this really streamlined process.
Great, I'm happy to hear it. And you'll start with those who are already on the waiting list, right?
We'll start with those that are actually already approved.
Okay.
Right, and then
We'll go
into the waiting list. Correct.
Thank you. I will let our seniors know, and I appreciate that.
And Councilmember, I'm sorry, if I could just add to, we couldn't fit everything in the slides, but there's also a $425,000 increase to the Safe at Home program, where we're both going to expand the eligibility of who qualifies by expanding the risk requirements to the CDC guidelines, and open up eligibility to all persons living in the home, which will allow more seniors to qualify.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that. One thing that's come up, I think colleagues have talked about, is school-based mental health, and I'm really excited to see some of the investments you all have here for school-based mental health. I think one of the things I want to know is, are we planning for these positions to be DBH clinicians or CBO graduate social workers? It looks like from $3.8 million, it likely we're looking at about salaries and benefits of about, I think, $70K, which means I think we're going to be hiring graduate social workers versus not DBH licensed independent clinicians. So I just want to get a sense of what we're doing there for retention, and if that 3.8 is going to be enough to bring in sort of enough of a competitive energy salary for us to have enough of the individuals we need in our schools to support school-based mental health.
So, Councilmember, I'll have to get back to you on the specific degree, like credential requirements. They are not FTEs, though, so they will be support through the CBEs, or the CBOs. But we'll get back to you on the specific level of credentialing.
Well, I recently held a meeting with our labor partners, SEIU, who represents a lot of the workers there, and Dr. Bazran. And so there is a complement of workers who are DBH employees that are in schools that complement the other group that our CBOs hire. There were some concerns raised by how we keep those people in our system that I think are valid. So we'll work with DBH to address that.
And it is a mixture that will include some graduate social workers, and the funding also provides the additional supervising and training resources the CBOs will need to be able to bring them in, properly supervise them, and then hopefully start a long career in DC.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I have to ask, I'm excited about the education, and with so many pages, I appreciate the investments in education, particularly the additional investments around hiring the school-based mental health, but also the HVAC repairs for our schools. You know, that's been a consistent issue, so I'm excited to see that. I do have some workforce-specific questions, right? So what I'm not sure about are some of the capital plans for schools in Ward 4. First, Roosevelt High School and Roosevelt Stay have an overcrowding issue that's been identified. And I'm not seeing sort of a short-term or long-term solution. The buildings, I think, is projected to be over 300 students over capacity next year. And I see we have an answer in here for Wilson crowding with the new MacArthur Boulevard High School, but I'm not seeing the answer for Ward 4 students overcrowding.
Well, we were at Roosevelt yesterday, and we are very committed to fixing the HVAC issue there. And I think that everything that we have included will help us address that. Unfortunately, we think there was a design defect when that school was built, that it will need a major correction, and we're going to correct it. We also contemplate when a swing space across the street from Roosevelt is not needed, that will allow us to address overcrowding between Roosevelt and Roosevelt Stay. I wouldn't be a former Ward 4 council member if I didn't mention how far we've come.
Right. Oh, yeah.
How far we've come.
Yeah.
And it's because of Ward 4 residents, committed activists, that both now Roosevelt and Calvin Coolidge High School are bursting at the seams. And I'm very proud that we stood together to make those investments. Not everybody thought we should, but we did. And that we're now serving students as a result.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And I think one thing is the swing space is the other question we have. And last year, you all did a great job in the budget, moving up some of the modernization for 3 of our Ward 4 schools. We have LaSalle Bacchus, as well as Whittier, as well as Truesdale. And I see we have a $20 million sort of fiscal increase for the swing space. But I'm hoping to see if you can talk to what's included in that, whether it's investments for an additional swing space in Ward 4 particularly, so that families attending neighborhood elementary schools don't have to travel. Particularly Truesdale's coming up very soon. They'll have to go all the way to Garnett Pass, Patterson on U Street. And so, which hasn't been an elementary school and doesn't have any really green space there. So can you say any more about the swing space plans with this additional investment? We won't be able to meet our modernization goals in Ward 4 with Whittier, Truesdale, or LaSalle Bacchus if we don't get an additional swing space to do the modernizations.
I don't know if did we address that specifically?
Are you talking about the concept of swinging those Ward 4 schools to sort of like Butler buildings or temporary buildings on an open space that within Ward 4 not swing all the way down?
Yeah, so we have 2 schools right now who are in 2 swing spaces getting modernized. Based on the timeline for those, we would have to wait to start our Truesdale or LaSalle Bacchus, and then Whittier. We would have to wait to start those modernizations because we don't have adequate amount of swing space to put them in. We proposed sort of a modular space being built so that we could address that need in Ward 4 as a part of the funding, but right now we don't see any sort of, there's nothing here moving the needle for those 3 schools to get the modernizations without an additional swing space or a modular space.
We're going to have to address that separately, Councilmember. Let me get back to you on that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I think I just had one more question. I just wanted to echo, I think Councilmember Nadeau already sort of talked about the alliance and sort of funds, and I think Councilmember Pinto also talked about excluded workers. I was wondering about the CARES program for excluded workers and immigrant justice, legal grants, and language access improvements. Where else should we expect to find sort of information on investments in our immigrant communities in this budget?
Throughout the budget. And a very big investment in the Alliance, as you know, that has been a priority for the Council for a number of years. We're pleased to support that. I created the Immigrant Justice and Legal Grant some years ago with the advent of Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. We've grown that from $1 million to I think now $3.5 million to continue to assist our residents. We're also heavily invested in the housing programs, which we know is actually, I think, has emerged also as the #1 issue for our immigrant communities.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll make my last plug is I see we have investments for a library for Brightwood, but also Shepherd Park. And I know Shepherd Park, many neighbors want to stay and have that Shepherd Park library stay and be modernized. But then there are also Brightwood Park neighbors who want to see an additional library space to deal with the gap in service there between Brightwood and Manor Park neighbors. And so I'll be looking to, as we talk further in the budget, talk about how we can ensure Shepherd Park has a new modernized library, but also Brightwood and Manor Park get a library that can serve them with that service gap that was identified.
And Councilmember, there is some funding in the public library budget in FY23 to do some engagement around that specific question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. I had a few questions. Could you clarify again on the Alliance? So the recertification will be annual now?
Annual, yes, annual and.
Annual, and it removes the face-to-face requirement.
I'm sorry, the last one?
It removes the face-to-face requirement for recertification, so Alliance recipients could recertify by phone, by mail, in person if they want, but it's every 12 months, and face-to-face requirement is removed.
Okay, thank you. I didn't hear, maybe I missed it, anything, what are you doing with regard to UDC and the subsidy, increasing it?
The what?
UDC?
UDC.
So, Chairman, there are a couple investments in UDC. So, first of all, in their overall capital budget, we are increasing their funding so that they can do more rehabilitation work and maintenance work across the CIP. There's also a just under $1 million investment in pay increases for their faculty, which they came to us as a high priority in order to help continue to build out their programs and services, as well as increases for some of their other labor and workforce. And then, of course, they will continue to be part of our DC Futures tuition assistance program, which was started last year and continues for the next several years, which provides low cost and free, actually, tuition for DC residents to enroll at UDC, Catholic, and Trinity universities.
So that latter is separate from the subsidy. The subsidy then is going up slightly?
Yes, it is.
My next question was the Department of Buildings is funded in this budget?
Yes, it is.
Do you want to say anything more about that?
We're really looking forward to working with you on it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I'll wait for the budget book. The 8th Street Bridge, so there are no changes to that other than funding sources?
There is an overall increase in the 8th Street Bridge funding. There just from continued work on the estimates, so there is an overall increase. And then otherwise just changing some funding sources. So some of the 8th Street Bridge is on the new bridge funding from the bill, but otherwise same schedule, just slightly higher dollar amounts.
And just so everybody knows, the reason why the 8th Street Bridge is important is because it unlocks the air rights development behind Union Station, but it also allows for the expansion of Union Station as a railway hub for the eastern seaboard. My last question, we'll be receiving the legislative documents today, tomorrow, Friday?
You should be receiving those today, Chairman.
Okay, so that would include the Budget Support Act?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember McDuffie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and to your entire team. There are a lot of things that I think residents are going to be excited about in this budget, and I want to take an opportunity just to highlight a few that are important to Ward 5 residents and I think small businesses across the District of Columbia. Obviously look forward to engaging in the budget oversight process, where I'm sure we'll have time to dig into more details. But some of the things that stand out, and I know have been stated already by some of my colleagues, are the investments in public safety, particularly violence interruption. That's something that I've worked really hard on. I know Charles Allen has put a lot of time and effort and resources into supporting and bolstering those programs. So seeing those investments is very important. The investment in the new jail, I think, is critically important to the district's overall public safety. I want to highlight the millions for youth recreation opportunities. I think whenever we talk about public safety, I know you all had a conversation about that earlier, accountability, consequences, we've also got to talk about opportunities. And when I see some of the investments that are made to the recreation, fully modernized, the Rita Bright Center, which I know is in Ward 1, but is near and dear to my heart because I grew up playing ball inside of that Boys and Girls Club. The 1,200 opportunities for girls' sports, I think is notable. As a girl dad, I appreciate, and I'm sure other parents will appreciate seeing additional opportunities for young women in the District of Columbia. The out-of-school time programming is absolutely essential to that other piece in terms of our public safety. It's not always viewed in that way, but I think it's important to note when we have these types of investments how it contributes to giving some of our youth the structure and programming they need to stay safe in their communities. Funding to improve response to residents' requests for repairs at DPR parks and fields. I want to highlight that because we get a lot of residents who reach out about parks and fields, and I know they are good about and you know, obviously recognizing Delano Hunter and the work that his team does, but a lot of activity on Twitter for these types of things. I know my staff, particularly my constituent services staff, interacts a lot with people who are making those types of requests. So I appreciate the investment that you all are making there. The educational investments, fully funding modernizations for Bunker Hill and Langley Elementary Schools. I know there are a lot of parents who are going to be excited when they find out about that. I think it's extraordinarily important. Investments in safety for bicyclists and pedestrians is another critically important investment. Really interested in what you all plan to do with the $10 million for the quick build traffic calming measures. I know we've had some really horrific crashes in Ward 5 that I'm sure you all are familiar with, and there are instances where residents would like to see things happen quickly. So I'm hoping that this is an effort to really support community safety in that way. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to say about that, but I'm really interested in what that means for safety in terms of traffic, for bicyclists and pedestrians especially.
Well, let me just address, we use a framework to deal with the high crash and high crash intersections and high crash corridors. It's a framework that we have used when talking about roads, streets, and alleys as state of good repair, going from poor to good. What I've asked my team to do is just how do we get from dangerous to good on those high crash intersections and corridors, and how do we match our capital investments to do that? So that capital investments is one, and those are usually longer term commitments. The other thing is enforcement and the people that can help with enforcement, including our traffic techs. That's why we have the increase, and including MPD, who's also made a commitment to more patrols around schools, especially during arrival and dismissal. But it also means quick kind of engineering changes. You've seen the flexi posts. You've seen us do crosswalks and striping. You've seen us do speed humps. These are things that don't often require long study or major engineering changes, but can have an immediate impact on safety. And we want them to be more permanent than some of the very temporary ones that you've seen. But how we address them is to go to those poorly performing high crash intersections and corridors. I think the budget also kind of looks at the streetscape improvements that we have funded previously, adds to it, and uses kind of this high crash as an overlay to make sure we're getting them funded.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that, and I spent a lot of time with Director Lott in Ward 5 neighborhoods across the ward, and hopefully we'll spend some time communicating to residents some of the things you all are trying to do here. I think that's very important. I'll close out, Mr. Chairman and Madam Mayor, talking about some of the investments that you're making supporting our city's economic recovery, especially the investment supporting our small and local businesses. We heard Ward 2 Councilmember Brooke Pinto talk about some of these earlier. And she and I worked together in the committee to do some of these things over the course of the pandemic. But the investments in tourism arts and entertainment industries, I think is very important. Those industries have been absolutely decimated by the pandemic. They're recovering, obviously. Now people are going to games, they're going to shows, and they're doing the sorts of things that we'd like to see them do, but we'd like to obviously welcome more visitors to our city as well as we continue to recover. So I think those investments are important. And they're also in areas and industries where a lot of our lower wage workers of color are traditionally employed. So I think recognizing how important those are to our recovery overall and our residents and workers is critical. The additional funding for important programs like the Commercial Acquisition Fund and the minority-led firms, investments that you're making there. I know I made a request in my budget letter to you around some of these initiatives, and so I got excited when you talked about that throughout the course of this presentation. Obviously, want to spend more time with Deputy Mayor Farchicchio to unpack how some of these things are going to land on our businesses, particularly those of color and women-led. But I was excited to see that in here, and I think the legacy initiatives is also something that's exciting. We've worked really hard to really identify ways to make the district more equitable for our small businesses, particularly those that are owned by minorities and women. And so when I see some of the things you're doing around heirs property, legal services, I mean, that's potentially transformational for families. I think that's incredible. I think Black Home Ownership Fund is something that's going to pique people's interest, definitely pique my interest in ways that we can keep some of our residents, especially those who weathered some of the tougher times over the years, 1980s and 1990s, to be able to stay age in place and get the support and benefits of the prosperity that we're seeing in the city right now. And so I appreciate you identifying that in this slide and look forward to, the flood smart homes. I mean, my colleagues probably get tired of me talking about all the flooding in Ward 5 around Bloomingdale, Edgewood, Eckington, some of the other communities, but I really am excited about that. The home weatherization and mold and lead remediation is absolutely essential to some of the homes that have been impacted and may likely be impacted when we have weather events in our city in years to come. And so I appreciate seeing those legacy initiatives and look forward to working with you all over the course of the budget oversight process to really see how these are going to impact residents in a positive way.
Thank you so much, Council Member, and thank you for highlighting all that it's going to take to bring our downtown and our commercial corridors back to create the jobs that we need for DC residents. You heard earlier that we still have some work to do to get to our pre-pandemic unemployment levels and to regain the progress that we made in Wards 7 and 8 in cutting unemployment. So creating jobs and making sure DC residents are getting those jobs is just highly important. We know that telework is going to have an impact on our daytime traffic today and maybe for years to come. Maybe it's here to stay. So how we replace that traffic, constantly recruiting employers, including recruiting residents who want to live in different places in the city and creating new signature activity in the downtown is going to be hugely important. So I know sometimes providing business incentives is not popular, but it's so necessary that the district can stay in the game against other regions who are recruiting the same employers and people. So one thing that this movement of people, the Great Resignation and 100% telework, some companies are doing. People are thinking long and hard about where they want to live and where they want to work. And so we have to stay competitive to attract new businesses.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think that concludes all the members. We will see you, Madam.
Anita.
Councilmember Bowser, I did not see you. I thought that concluded all the members. It would help if folks identified themselves, but okay, Councilmember Bonds.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairman, and special thanks to the mayor and her team. This is a budget that I think there's a lot to be thankful for when we think about where we have been through the pandemic and the status of our recovery. We thought we were going to have close to almost $1 billion in surplus, and we know now that it's down to a couple of hundred million. And so that, to me, is the story of where we are as a city trying to recover from the pandemic. I want to especially thank you for the legacy initiatives, Mayor. You hit it right on the nail, and I think many people will show extreme appreciation for how we're looking at maintaining our longstanding residents and those families. You also give us an opportunity to bring new people and, of course, businesses into the city, so I want to thank you for that. I actually identified 12 things I wanted to speak to, but since the chairman is moving us along here, I will not go through all of those items because they're all on different pages. But this is really a good budget. Under the circumstances that we find ourselves operating in. I wanted to say that. I love my item number 10, which is the new indoor sports complex at RFK campus. And knowing a little something about the Kennedy family, I can tell you they would be very proud to think that we're concentrating on children. And I'm sure my colleague, Councilmember Gray, is ecstatic. He's got many thoughts about how he's doing that, and I'm not to take from Charles, my other colleague. I know they both are going to fight over this, but you know, it belongs to the city, and so we will be all over. It belongs to all of us, and so we want to make sure that we get and have our chance as well. Thank you for putting more emphasis on our young people, because I feel that is where we are as a city, understanding that it is more than our young people, which we consider juveniles, but it's those that we're trying to give an opportunity to grow and to expand and to be all that they can be to keep our society moving forward. And so I guess I do have two questions which I wanted to zero in on. Where would you find the emergency housing funds for persons that are under threat of harm because they're perhaps waiting to testify in court? What part of the budget do we find that? We have some individuals who are under threat from neighbors, but the court date has not happened. They're not under witness protection or anything like that, but they are, yes, break-ins, beat-ups, and things like that are happening to them.
There's a few different places that you can go to look for that. You did mention there are individuals who may be under witness protection that through MPD and the federal officials will be able to have short-term housing. However, we put into our ARPA money for this fiscal year that will continue throughout the financial plan the ability for, it's in the Office of Victim Service and Justice Grants, but the ONES office plays a pivotal role in its implementation for short-term housing for individuals and families who need relocation assistance due to an imminent or likely danger to them. That's not connected to their cooperation or their involvement with prosecutors or police.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know exactly where to find that. And also for the $26 million on page 12, which is help low-income first-time home buyers, are you proposing also an increase from 80,000 to maybe 150,000, or is it even greater given the cost of purchase of a home today?
Yes, ma'am. We are going to expand to $202,000 for HVAC.
Thank you.
That will incredibly increase the buying power for our first-time home buyers.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm hoping that there will be many who are long-term residents and children of those who have been long-term residents that will have an opportunity to apply for that.
So you've heard from the parents who want to make sure that their college-age children can buy in the district.
Correct.
And programs like this, I think I haven't been any place in the city where that's not a concern. People know that they have been able to build a great life here, and they want some assurance that their children can build a great life here too and move back home.
Yes.
But not in their basements.
Yes, that's
So,
right. I have 3 that would love to have an opportunity as a starter.
Well, unless it's an accessory apartment,
Oh,
we do want to, yeah.
Of course.
Accessories are important. So where are the accessories dollars in this budget? John, you open your mouth.
Well, but to get to accessories, we just need to make sure that the regulations permit it, and that we continue to promote it, but also permit it, which they do.
Well, many of our aging community members would happily participate in the accessory dwelling program if they had some outside assistance, financial assistance to make it happen. So since it is a bona fide program, I guess the dollars are located somewhere within our budget.
Well, that we added an incentive this time, Madam Chair, but we'll work with you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Again, thank you so much. I'm delighted that we are now talking women in the police department, because I always say that women make the world much, much better. And I see all us women here, so I know that that is true. And I'm not trying to be patronizing to the women here. I just want us to understand that times have changed, and particularly times have changed as we're looking at coming out of the pandemic. I think the mayor made a very fair statement of saying we don't know what it will be like ultimately for our downtown core. We may end up being almost a residential community, because right now we support ourselves pretty much from ourselves, the taxes that we raise, but we must maintain some commercial opportunities in the city, and so we've got to learn to take advantage of it. So that means we all have to be out having dinner every night. But seriously, this is a very important budget that you have, and I thank you very much. It's some good stuff for everyone. Thank you.
And Councilmember, we don't want to forget what the commercial property taxes do for us.
100%.
Certainly, our residential tax base has done extremely well throughout this pandemic, but our commercial has dipped.
Yes.
And long term, a dip in the commercial revenues to the city mean all the things that we couldn't do, that we're doing today, we wouldn't be able to do, but for increasing taxes someplace else on our residents. So the investments in bringing people back to commercial corridors and jobs back and people working is very, very important to how we invest in making this the world-class city that it is.
Exactly, and that's what we notice in this budget. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Gray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Madam Mayor, I want to thank you for the groundbreaking that we had.
Yes.
It was just absolutely delightful to be able to see so many people there, to see you there, to see so many members of your team who were there, who played such an important role with you in getting us to the point where we finally have a healthcare system underway on the east end of the city. I just want to ask you a question or two, and then we can move on from there. But I know that we expect a real healthcare system to be built as a part of the new work that's being done on the east end of the city. I know that there's a lot of concern, a lot of interest in an urgent care system being built also on the east end of the city, some of which will be in Ward 7, some of which will be in Ward 8. So can you speak to that to some extent, Madam Mayor, about how that health care system will unfold as we now go forward, and the timetable that we're doing?
And I'm going to ask Jenny and Kevin to help me with the timetable, but as you are correct, the work for the hospital, first of all, is fully funded here. That includes the infrastructure work at St. Elizabeth's, and parking, includes everything that we need to prepare the horizontal so that the building can go up, and the construction of the facility. So we're very pleased about that. We also contemplate 2 urgent care centers, as Jenny to talk about where those items are funded, and the partnership that we have been able to craft with Universal Health Services and GW Health is complete. So we're on track to open a hospital at the end of 24. That is a full service serving the residents of the District of Columbia, located in Ward 8. So we're very, very happy about that. And I want to thank you for all that you've done to help us get there. Let's talk about urgent care.
So the urgent care facilities, and we'll get you the specifics, council member, to follow up, but part of those urgent care facilities are being built as part of our commitment with our university hospital services and George Washington University. So part of the agreement is that they will help us provide funding in order for us to be able to open those urgent cares. We will get back to you on the specifics of where and when.
Do you have any thoughts on the when?
Yes.
That will happen?
Deputy Mayor just told me exactly. In Ward 8, we will open urgent care this fall, in Ward 7 next year. And as Jenny mentioned, they're fully funded by the agreement with UHS.
Okay. Well, it's delightful to be able to know that we're going to have a real healthcare system being constructed, being built, and operated in the District of Columbia. So I want to thank you, Madam Mayor, for the work that you've done on this, and the members of your team who worked so hard to bring us to where we are today. That's such an important consideration, such an important thing to be able to look at this stage. One final thing I'll ask: we've been working with some members of your team, Deputy Mayor Kine, and also and others of your team, around what we do about the Hillcrest Recreation Center. And I'm hopeful that we can do something during this budget to be able to bring some redress to what's needed there. There are people who are deeply concerned about that, and we look forward to having some work being done on that.
Absolutely. So you will be pleased that the investment that we make on that campus, including Winston, will bring education, citywide education services to Hillcrest. And the chancellor envisions this as an advanced technical institute that will have lab space and other activities to support STEM for the city at Winston. We also invest in an indoor pool that would connect.
Yes.
I think the plan is to connect the rec center in Winston Elementary.
I think that's great news.
I think that's fantastic news.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. We appreciate it. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think now we've gone through all the council members. Thank you, Madam Mayor. We will see you on Friday when you present to the council formally at noon.
Will I be at the chamber?
Yes, that will be in the chamber.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, council members.
Thank you.